Hi, I'm Gina, creator and host of Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that is designed to have real talk around all things midlife and strategies to help us live a more vibrant second half. It is my deepest desire to help other people shift the conversation toward empowerment, toward vibrancy, toward excitement about what life has for us and what we can bring to the world, how we can each individually shine our light. So I invite you to grab a cup of something wonderful, to join me each week or when you can, and join me in my living room to have these conversations. And if you are enjoying this, please take the time to subscribe wherever you listen, rate my podcast, and share the episodes that help you, the episodes that encourage you. Let's build this community together. Welcome to my tribe. I'm so grateful you're here. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife. This year, we've been focusing on finding women who are doing extraordinary things after the age of 50, testing their boundaries, their fears, what they thought they were capable of. And today, I'm speaking with Dierdre Wolownick. She's a linguist, a climber, an author of a book, The Sharp Edge of Life. She was introduced to me by another guest who shared her story of leaving her corporate job to write a documentary. Dierdre is going to be the subject of that woman, Melissa Davies' second documentary. And of course, I had to talk to her. So Melissa introduced us, and today you get to meet Dierdre and hear her amazing story of what she has accomplished after the age of 66. Dierdre, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Like I told you before we hit record, once Melissa told me about your book, I listened to the whole thing very quickly and really enjoyed hearing about your journey and the way that you shared your story. Why don't you share a little bit about who you are and how you got into climbing? You have such an interesting story.
Well, we've got to go way back, but my son is the subject of the documentary Free Solo. I'm probably the most famous climber in the world, and certainly the boldest and the only one capable of climbing that huge rock face called El Capitan in Yosemite without ropes. He has a different kind of mind. He can control it, and other people can't. I don't think that will ever be repeated, because he is different. And both of my kids are adventurers, and both of my kids are extreme athletes like that. My daughter, Stacia, is also a climber, a very good climber, better than me, but that's not her sport of choice. She's a runner and a cyclist, long distance, both. But so they were unusual children to raise, very unusual. Son especially, it was really hard to raise him because I didn't know about climbing back then when he was little, but that's all he ever wanted to do. So, I come at this child raising thing with a different perspective than most people. And so I got into, earlier than the climbing, I got into running with them, not sort of with them, but kind of because of them. You have to read the book. By the way, it's The Sharp End of Life, not edge, but it's The Sharp End of Life. And that's a climbing term, the sharp end. You have to read the book to understand why it's called that. So about 55, I started jogging, just a little jogging, 'cause with the dog. We had a big dog, and I wound up through a series of a whole 7-8 years of things that happened left and right. People dying, people leaving me a house and another house. I had to remodel stuff on both coasts of this country, and I was working more than full time, and all kinds of things going on. And so every evening after I finished working at 10 or 11 at night, I would take the dog out for a walk. And it was a big dog, a Malamute, an Alaskan sled dog. And so we would run, she would trot through the neighborhood, and these long, powerful legs, I had to run to keep up with her. And I knew it was good for me, so I tried. And but I knew that And like so many of us, I knew, quote unquote, air quotes, this limit of mine. I had grown up in a house filled with cigar and cigarette smoke. And so just getting up out of my chair and I would huff and puff, my lungs were shot, absolutely shot. They didn't know back then that it was bad for you, or the extent to which it was bad for you. So, nobody thought anything of it back then, but because I go way back. I'm 70 now, and this goes way back to when I was 55. And so I assumed all my life that, I couldn't go running or swimming or anything that was cardio that involved deep breathing, regular, sustained breathing. So I just accepted that as a limit. And, but I'd take the dog out every evening and we go jogging. And one evening I came tearing back into the house yelling, Alex, Alex, my son was still living at home back then. And Alex, I just ran a mile. You can't imagine the excitement, because I was sure I had reached my Everest. I had reached the peak. I couldn't do any better than that. I ran a mile when I knew that I couldn't jog at all. So Alex comes trotting down the hallway and this cookie and, great, Mom, bravo. If you can do a mile, you can do a mile and a half. Took all the wind out of my sails. I was totally deflated. He was just, you can do a mile, you could do a mile and a half. I was speechless. And at the same time, I knew that, son of a gun, he was right. If you can do a mile, you can do a mile and another block, a mile and a quarter. Whatever your goal is, whatever you might be teasing your brain with, maybe I could start a business. Maybe I could run a marathon. Maybe I could swim the English Channel, whatever you're dreaming about, if you can do the first little baby step towards that dream, you can do the rest by baby steps. And son of a gun, he was right. He changed my life that day. And I started thinking about it. And I had run a mile. Maybe I could so the next time we went out, the dog and I did a mile and around our little block. It's a little square block, maybe just a quarter mile. And I did it. And son of a gun, I celebrated that. And then next time, maybe a week or so later, I went out there and did a mile and a half, just like my son had said, I could do a mile, and on and on and on. And by the middle of that year, I heard about this race. I guess a lot of towns have this race, like a turkey trot for Thanksgiving.
Yes. Yeah.
To feed the food banks, for people who don't have food. And I signed up for it. 6 miles. It's a 10K. I didn't know anything about running back then. I was running in my jeans and my sweatshirts and, my Kmart sneakers. I had I was alone. I would work all day and I'd come home, change my clothes, go down into my office and work on the estate work and the remodeling work and all the other stuff. And then I'd go run in the dark with the dog, with the headlamp. And so you never know. This was a total surprise to me. That's the important part for anybody, for your listeners, for everybody. That was a total surprise to me because I, quote unquote, knew, I couldn't do this. And to surprise yourself like that is quite a heady experience. And once you feel it, then you want to feel it again and again. So when I was about 6, almost turning 60, my son he had a tendinitis or something in his arm. He couldn't climb for a little while. And for the last 10 years before that, I was listening to him. I would see photos of him in books and in magazines out doing these extraordinary things that I didn't understand because I had never climbed. I'd never seen climbing happen. He just, left the house and came back. That's all I knew. And he would sit around with his friends and talk about these expeditions and where they were going, what they would use, what gear they used, or where they had been, and what gear they'd used and what they'd done. And I didn't understand any of it. And I don't like not knowing what's going on around me. I'm a linguist. I speak 8 languages. I have taught 5 foreign languages in my 44-year career as a teacher and professor. I don't like not being able to communicate and not being able to understand people. So I learned languages and that's not an issue. But this was a language I did not know. And I asked him to take me to the climbing gym just so I could get a little bit of the jargon. I'd see what the things were called, how to attach the harness. Just putting on the harness was hard. It's not intuitive. And then how to tie the rope, safely onto your harness and all that stuff. So I figured, but again, I knew there's another air quote moment. I grew up in New York City. And so I have a lot of friends who live, high up in apartment buildings. And I've been up many skyscrapers and big buildings, World Trade Center, I was up there, and all the big buildings. And I knew, quote unquote, that I was afraid of heights. How many people do you know who say they're afraid of heights? Yeah, almost everybody. I could never climb because I'm afraid of heights. Well, if you think that, you got to think it again, because people who say they're afraid of heights, they're not afraid of the height itself. They're not afraid of the highness of it. They're afraid of falling off it. That's where the fear comes from.
Yeah.
But when you're tied onto a rope that goes up to that bobbin 45 feet above this really soft rubber floor where you're not going to get hurt, and then your rope comes down to my son, the strongest climber in the world, I had no fear whatsoever. I did that first climb. I went all the way up. I looked down, thinking I wouldn't be able to look down from the height, because I was afraid of heights. It didn't bother me at all because I knew I couldn't fall. Once you know you can't fall off, the fear of that height goes away. Not completely, not right away. It takes a while for you to learn to trust that rope and the person at the other end of the rope. There's a lot of trust involved in climbing, but that goes away. And so I started climbing, and he of course wasn't around. He left for another expedition. He's been all over the world doing this. But I made friends, and they took me all over the Sierra Nevada here in California and other places. I've climbed in a lot of parts of the world now, and it's been an incredible journey.
That is the part that's amazing. When I wanted to get together with you, it was like, well, she's going to Europe to do a book tour and climb the Dolomites. And I just thought, okay, I have to talk to this woman because it is extraordinary to do that to begin with.
Yeah.
And then to do it at a time of life when the expectation is your wind.
Yeah, we have to talk about expectations.
Yes, we're winding down, right? When are you going to stop? When are you going to retire? Where
does that come from? All those expectations.
I don't know, but let's talk about it. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Largely from the media.
Mm.
Largely, 99% maybe from the media. Maybe all of it, maybe not all of it. But the media, and then we pick up on that and say, if the doctors say this and that, and maybe you shouldn't be doing this at your age. Maybe you're too old. Maybe you should take up something safer.
Crocheting or something.
Yeah. The media. Turn off the media, and you don't get this message. I've never, even when I was a little kid. I mean, I liked climbing when I was a little kid. I wasn't supposed to do it though. I was supposed to wear dresses and be a little girl and help my mother, and but I loved climbing. I would follow the little boys, the bigger boys, they're bigger than me. I would follow them, and we'd go up garage roofs and trees and things. I loved it. I wasn't supposed to do it. But even then, I never understood why old people would say things like, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. You're 60. Oh, you should get, in a house with no stairs, or you should, you shouldn't be going out into the woods. Why not? But all the old people I knew came from Europe. That's after I grew up in New York City after World War II. And so it was overrun with they didn't call them immigrants, refugees, people escaping the wars all over the world. Not so much in Asia, but it was mostly European. And so all the old people I knew, they dressed in black and they wore those chunky shoes and they were hair in a bun and they all spoke. No, I never met an old person who spoke English until I moved to California as a native language. Yeah, they all spoke with that thick accent or their own language. And they all were old. And then as I got older, the media started bombarding me with this. You want to start running? Well, go see your doctor first. Why? Running is our natural activity. Running is what we're made for. Walking and running is what we're made for. That's our means of locomotion for millions of years. And now all of a sudden, if I want to do that, I have to go see a doctor? Who are you kidding? There's the messages out there are so unhealthy and so, what's the word I'm looking for? Downplaying of what we are capable of.
They're minimizing the capabilities that we naturally have. Exactly. Yeah.
To the point where we forget that we have these abilities. People say, "Oh, Dierdre, you shouldn't be." It was a tough sell at work. I would come in to work. I taught at the college, the local community college here. And a Monday morning, we'd all go back to work and stand around the hallway with our coffee and say, "What'd you do this weekend? What'd you do this weekend?" And they, I polished my floors. I went to the market. I did that. And I'd say, "Oh, I climbed Tenaya Peak this weekend with my son." They didn't know what to do with that. And they would say, "Dierdre, that's not safe. Are you being careful?" And, that's their whole focus was staying safe. And when I was 4, that wasn't my focus. I mean, it's just a different way of looking at things. But they always have their screens on. You go to anybody's house, you stand around the living room chatting and, catching up, and the TV is on behind you. And what's TV talking about? Every single ad that I went to my friend's house, I don't remember what it was, before I started all this, and she had the TV on, and it's just on in the background. And you are subliminally taking in all these messages.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Every advertisement I saw behind her, I was looking at her, but the screen was right next to her, so I could see them. Every one was for drugs. Everyone was for a drug, a different drug to do this and to do that. Can't sleep, take a drug. You want to lose weight, take a drug. That's not our natural state. Our natural state is not consuming stuff out of a laboratory. Our natural state is to go out in nature and do things. You want to get slimmer? Go hiking, go jogging, go walking, go whatever. Out in nature. Nature knows what we need. We are part of nature. We forget this because we live in cities. But it's just such an anti-human message coming out of the media, and people absorb it. People, what's the word?
We accept it. We believe it. We own that as a reality.
Yes, they consume it as if it's natural, and it is. When I raised my kids, we did not have a television in the house, and that was my choice. And so my kids never got the habit of sitting and watching someone else do things. They wanted to be outside doing things with their friends and stuff. When their friends would come over, they wouldn't all sit in front of a screen and watch other people do things. They would go out and do them, and that's the natural way. And sitting and watching that's the crippled way, basically. Only old wounded people who couldn't move would sit and watch other people do things. The others were out there doing things.
I found that there was a time when people looked older sooner, too.
Oh, heck yes. Oh, yes. My parents were old in their 40s.
Right? Yes.
Yeah. My grandmothers and all of my grandparents, they were so old. They were like in their 60s. And they all were dead in their 70s, all of them. But there's a lesson in there. There's a lesson in there for all of us. You want to die in your 70s? Sit and don't do anything.
Starting in your 50s.
Or 20s. I mean, the human body is made for movement. That's what our feet are for. Their feet, they're made to hold on, to climb rocks and to climb dirt and to climb trees and to run. And if you don't have them doing that, they're going to get useless and old and worn.
Isn't it crazy when you look back over time how old people look so much younger? You're talking about like in their 40s, they were old. And I was thinking, because of my grandparents, I was around them so much. I remember thinking they looked old. Their friends looked old. And then I started to do the math recently and realized.
Were they in their 60s or something?
They were probably in their 50s at the time.
Oh, my.
Like close to my age. And I'm thinking, I don't look anything like my grandparents did at my age.
Exactly. We don't dress like they did. When I was a kid, all old people had come from Europe after the war, and they all wore black long skirts and bun in their hair. And yeah, it's all in the mind. If you dress like that, you're gonna feel like that, and they didn't do anything.
Well, and then the community mindset too. And I think that's something to think about, like who you're hanging around with. And really, it sounds like you were the one doing the different thing. And when you do something so radically different, Dierdre, I think you become this mirror that challenges people on all the things they thought they couldn't do. And it can really be triggering or upsetting for people. Right. They might just think, oh, well, you're just different. But it's like, it's hard to face the reality that you've been wrong. And then you start to think, what did I miss out on? And, you could just picture people spiraling like,
Exactly.
Where is my life?
Right.
Now, you started climbing inside at about 60.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I started to make friends because my son was gone. He was always on some part of the globe doing some outrageous thing. And so I was alone, after that first day when he took me and showed me how to do stuff, showed me the ropes, After that day, I was on my own, because he was gone. So it took me a few months to get up the courage to go back to the climbing gym alone. I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't even put on the darn harness by myself. It's not intuitive. And I don't like being ignorant. I don't like not knowing what I'm doing. I don't like not knowing the language. I didn't know what everything was called or how to, whatever. So it took me a while to get back to the gym, but I did eventually. And then I started to make friends, and then they helped me. And after about 6 months of helping me in the gym and, climbing with me and having fun, and when they started taking me outdoors to climb on real rocks, which is a totally different world, totally different.
Yeah, they don't have the little colored sized things.
Yeah. And no rubber, soft rubber floor in case you fall. Very different world. A lot of consequences when you go outdoors.
Now, what is the journey that's happening in your head as you're doing these things? Because you really were outside of the quote norm in your age group.
Yeah. Well, I've always been on the younger side, looking and feeling I'm slim, and I wasn't slim then though. I weighed like 45 pounds more back then when I was starting, but I've always been active. I've always been active, riding my bike. When I was a kid, we all skated outdoors in the street, and I'd go ice skating and things, but individual things, never like sustained sports like swimming or soccer or whatever. So at the beginning, it wasn't much of a struggle to get into it at the beginning, because I wanted to understand my son. The motivation was very high. I wanted to understand my son. He and I had absolutely nothing in common. I mean, other than, family stuff, and raising him and all that, but internally, mentally, psychologically, whatever you want to call it, we had nothing in common, because his entire world was climbing. That's all he ever wanted to do from the day he was born. The only thing he ever wanted to do was get up higher, to climb up higher. Could never have him in a crib when he was a baby. He could never sleep in a crib. He slept on the floor on a baby futon. We had just got back from Japan when he was born, and so we had futons and all that stuff. So he was different, and I didn't understand the difference. Mm-hmm. I understood it in terms of taking care of him, and as he grew from a baby, to a toddler and a more capable young man, I could see how capable he was. And I was aware to a certain extent, not much, but more than the other parents around me. I could see what he could do. And I knew how careful he was and how thoughtful. He was a wonderful little boy when he wasn't climbing. He was a wonderful little boy, quiet. He loved to read and loved to draw. But he was capable of things that the other kids were not. And so we were all, the three of us, because it was just the two kids and me all the time. My husband was always off at some conference or somewhere else. And he didn't help at home at all. And anyway, it was just the three of us all the time. And we were like the playground pariahs. We were not welcome anywhere because of him. Because he would go to a playground, and then in 30 seconds, he'd be up on the top of the tree, or leaping from the tree to the brick wall that surrounded the playground, or, crazy things that other parents were terrified of. And their kids always wanted to follow him. And they would try, and they'd fall, and they'd get hurt, and they'd cry. And the mothers would all come running and yelling at me, can't you control your son? Heck no, nobody can control him. That's nature. That's his genetic pool, probably came from me, the genetics. But so yeah, we were different all the way from his birth onward. And from my daughter's birth onward too. She's 2 years older than he is. She was born in Japan, where we lived there teaching. And so our life has been different, all the way. And so.
But so you basically had this unusual opportunity to have a different perspective on what is safe, what is possible, and thinking outside the box.
My son had this mono focus. What was fun to him was not fun to anybody else, the kids or their parents. And we didn't have screens at home. We didn't have people yelling at us from the television, telling us what to do, what not to do, what drug to take while we do it, and all that stuff, what to eat and what we should weigh and how we should dress. We didn't have all that at home because we didn't have a TV. There were no computers, back then. Didn't have cell phones. So we went out and did stuff, lots and lots of fun outdoor stuff. And that's what kids are for. That's what kids are for. Kids don't like sitting in a dark room watching a screen. Yeah, they'll do it. And they'll think it's fun because everybody else is doing it, But that's not what kids are made for. And so we had a different kind of upbringing. And the other parents didn't understand it. I mean, the other parents we lived on the end of a street was a circular court. And so the kids were always out playing, there was no traffic. And so the other parents, they would spend hours out there tossing a ball for their son or their daughter or whatever, or, teaching him how to ride a bike or whatever. But climbing, no, that was taboo. Climbing was something, A, that they didn't understand, and B, that none of them could do, and C, they all thought was too dangerous. And so we were never really part of any group. we were the outliers,
So how did you find your climbing community? How did that transpire? Because
when I started going to the climbing gym, I made friends with them, and they all were outliers too, because because it wasn't a thing back then. And so it just kind of blossomed from there.
So what was your first really big climb?
Well, the first really... really big is a relative term,
Sure.
It could be in your own mind.
So not 40 feet. Let's say it took you a couple of hours.
Oh, okay. The first time, my gang, my tribe, from the climbing gym, they used to take me out to the Sierra Nevada, and there's a lot to climb out there, and just an hour or so from Sacramento, and so we were out in outrageous climbing. And the first time they took me out, I couldn't do anything. I could not do anything at all. I just didn't know how. I watched everybody else do it, and I got on the rope, and I couldn't do anything at all. It was very frustrating. But I knew that it was in me. I knew it was latent because I just watched all them do it. So I knew it was possible. So I just persisted. But eventually, with climbing, you can go cragging, which is you stand on the ground, you go up and you come down to the ground. Okay, that's maybe 40, 50, 80, 100 feet, maybe. Or you can go do a rope length to measure climbs and walls. A rope length is called a pitch. So you can do that kind of climbing, cragging, just go up and down. Or you can do multi-pitch, which means the leader climbs up, makes an anchor. Then the second person climbs up behind him, joins him or her. And then from that ledge or wherever you stopped, you go up again. So you don't come back to the ground. Multi-pitching,
Mm-hmm.
So the first multi-pitch they took me on, the first pitch of it was only about maybe 60 to 80 feet. It's not that high for a climb. It's high for a building. It's high when you're hanging on a little rope thinking, I'm going to die. But it wasn't high for them. And they were all experienced climbers. And so we did the first pitch. So when you're climbing, you're facing the rock. The rock is 6 inches from your face. You know, there's not much to look at. You're watching your hands. You're watching your feet. Where you're going to put them. When you turn around, though, and you see where you are, everything changes. So I did the climb, I did the first pitch, and I got to the first ledge where all my friends were hopping around, attaching ropes to this and that, and I didn't know what they were doing. I was new to this. I got to the first pitch, and I kind of, what they call it, mantling, where you push down and go up, and then I turned around and plopped my backside down on the ledge. So I was sitting on the ledge with my feet dangling, and I looked down. And I was instantly paralyzed with fear. Paralyzed. I couldn't move from that spot. They were hopping all over, but they weren't even attached, my friends, because it's a big ledge. So big that I was so terrified. And they're saying, here, Dierdre, hold this. And all I could say was, I can't. You know, here, Dierdre, attach this over there. Clip this in. I can't. That's all I would say. I can't. So they left me alone. They understood what was going on. You know, they'd all been there. They'd all done that. And so I just sat there and I grabbed my piece of gear and I clipped myself in behind me onto the wall behind me. Then I took another one on the other side of me and I clipped myself into the wall on that side of me. All the while thinking, okay, the safer the better. The safer the better. And I just had to make peace with that. So that was the very first attempt at going high on rocks. But in order to do this stuff, and I suspect in order to do any activity where you are going to surpass yourself, you have to learn to talk to yourself and convince yourself that the fear that you feel is unwarranted. I was attached in 3 different places. I knew that nothing could happen to me. And still, I was victim of this lifelong fear that had been drilled into me, you know, be careful. The phrase I heard all the time growing up was, be careful, you know, at the beach, don't go in that far, don't go in that far, it's dangerous. That's all I heard from my parents, from those old people who surrounded me. That's a rotten message to give your kids. It really is, because they never learn to surpass themselves, to go farther, further, whatever. So I talked myself that day out of that horrible fear, and we did do the rest of the climb. It was a 3-pitch climb, and I did the whole thing. I was very proud of myself. I was very much afraid, and I was very proud of myself that I had talked myself through it. And so the first big climb that I ever did, though, not that was a baby climb, but not for me,
Yeah.
But that year, like 6 months into that year of climbing, my son came through the house. He was not living here anymore, but he came home to stock up his van and stuff. He said, Mom, we should do Half Dome this weekend. Half Dome? Half Dome is what I'm wearing on my little thing here. You can see the pictures behind me, kind of?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Half Dome is the very first one on the left there. My son and me on Half Dome. Half Dome is that big half dome-shaped rock that looms over Yosemite Valley, Yosemite National.
But there's 2 ways up Half Dome. You can go up the flat side or the round side, and I'm assuming you went up the flat side.
No, the flat side is where the cables are, which is where the tourists go up. There are cables and there are steps, so it's relatively safer. The other side, which is, they call it a shoulder that goes up the dome, is open, empty, just slabs of rock. And that's where the roped climbs are, where the climbers go. And it's an 8 to 10 pitch climb, which is very long. And so Alex suggested this, and I said, in my little climber's head, I thought, wow, he thinks I'm capable of doing Half Dome. Let's go do it. I had no clue at that point what it entailed to do something like that, or how good or not I was yet. I didn't have the measures of an experienced climber. He did, though. And I knew he did. And so I was thinking, well, he thinks I can do this. So let's go do it. So we climbed Half Dome. And I didn't find out until we were at the top why he wanted to do this. He had to be up there that day. I don't know if you remember the National Geographic magazine that came out with him standing with his back to Half Dome with no ropes or any safety equipment. That's when he did that climb. He did that climb that year. And it made history and made a name for him as the free solo climber that nobody else could be. And so he needed to be up there with National Geographic folks to take the photos for that magazine. The photos for that climb were all taken after the actual climb, recreated, if you will. So he needed to be up there that afternoon. They were going to take alpenglow pictures, with the sun setting, and makes everything glow gold and orange, very pretty. So they were going to take alpenglow pictures of him on Half Dome. So he climbed the face. There are 3 ways up Half Dome. You can go up the flat side with the cables and the steps. You can go up the round sloping side where the climbers go, or you can go straight up the flat face, which is where the elite climbers go, and that's what he had free soloed. So he needed to be up there. So he said, well, let's go do it, because he knew I wanted to get out and climb everything. It was my new thing. I wanted to go try everything. And so we did. And I had no idea what to expect. It was a marathon day. We hiked for 4.5 hours to get to the climb. Then we climbed the rest of the day until 5 in the afternoon. We started at 5:30 in the morning, hiked for 4.5 hours, hard hiking, straight up, and had several mishaps on the way. And then we climbed from lunchtime until like 5:30 in the afternoon. And then he stayed up there with them, and my friend and I, who had been on the rope with Alex, went down the cables. We went down the way the tourists come up. It was terrifying. I was totally out of my element. I tried to keep smiling from the pictures and from my son, and but in my head I was absolutely terrified, because there's nothing. The sloping part of Half Dome doesn't have a lot on it to hold. There's nothing on it, just sloping rock. So I had to learn a different style of climbing, very different style I had never done before. It's called slab climbing, and I had never done it. And the first time I tried to do it was on Half Dome, 8 pitches. And it was really hard for me mentally. Climbing is 99% mental. People don't realize this until you try it. You can't know this, but climbing has nothing to do with upper body strength, nothing whatsoever. I don't have much upper body strength. I have these little chicken arms, I have no muscles. And when I started this, I had no muscles, but climbing is mostly feet and legs, and your arms are kind of like for holding on and for balance, for direction. So I was new to all this, and I had never done slab type climbing. And so I learned on the way as we went. And I had never done unroped climbing, and I never will. But the last 2 pitches are unroped. I didn't know that until we got there. And I got to the second last pitch, and I arrived at the bolts where you stop, and I looked up, and my son is taking the rope off. His rope is attached to me. So I said, well, Alex, what are you doing? He said, there's no way to protect this part, Mom. You just walk it. Protect it means you can plug something in the rock in a hole in something and attach the rope to it so you're protected. It's called protection, putting protection in the rock. Well, there's no place to put protection on the last 2 pitches. So I said, no, don't untie. I understood the concept. You have to just walk it. You can't attach to anything. Nonetheless, I was attached to the strongest climber in the world. And I knew that, I was really tired by then. I was starting to stumble, and I was just really worn out by then. It's a really tiring day. I was exhausted. So I said, no, stay. So I made him stay attached to me, knowing that if I did stumble, he was strong enough and capable enough that he would just lean in and he would hold me in place. Just that little bit of assurance or insurance, whatever you want to call that, made me able to do the last 2 pitches.
And how old were you on this climb?
I was 60. I was 60.
Now, when you did El Capitan, how old were you then?
That was like 5 years later, 6 years later.
66, you climbed El Capitan.
I did. But in the meantime, we'll take a look at these photos.
Okay.
Each one of them. See, I only climbed with my son really on my birthdays. That's my birthday present every year. He takes me up something spectacular. And there's a lot of stuff in the Yosemite area, of the Sierra Nevada, which is spectacular and large scale, but not very difficult. Because every climb is rated for its difficulty level. There are guidebooks that tell you this information. You need to know this. And so my difficulty level is way different from his. So climbing with me for him is babysitting, basically. He wastes a day. You could look at it that way, a day when he could have been doing something fun. Instead, he's babysitting his mom. And I understand this. And he understands that, we get along okay. And I'm sure he's happy to do it. I've heard other climbers say to him, wow, I wish my mom or dad would go out and try climbing, And so he's heard this and he knows this. So he does this once a year with me. So all of these pictures behind me, these photos, are an amazing climb that are big names and that everybody dreams about doing in Yosemite area that are not terribly difficult, that I could do, I'll never be a really accomplished climber. I'll never be a really good climber. I'm not willing to just go for it, like the young studs in their 20s and 30s, just go for it. Mom, no, I'm not going to go for it. I'm going to go slowly and carefully, So we did like 5 or 6 of those in the ensuing years between, Half Dome and El Cap. And I was beginning to get pretty confident and capable. I mean, I could, like I said before, climbing is 99% mental. They call the routes that they bouldering is climbing without ropes on smaller boulders or, big boulders, but just, up and down from the ground. And they call those routes that they climb on boulders, they call those problems. They're boulder problems. They call them that because that is exactly what climbing is. You have to figure out how to get from this point to that point, which angle you need to be in. There's a lot of physics involved. If you fall when you're doing this, which angle will you fall in? What will you hit when you go down that far? If I stand this way, that will turn my body this way and the angle will change. I'll be able to reach that. It's mostly mental. And I was getting the hang of that. And that's what I like. I like problems that require figuring out, I've always been a thoughtful kind of person. All of my activities, all my life, I've been many things. I've been a publisher, I've been a writer, been a teacher, of course, all my life. I've been a tour guide, I've been an airline person, I've been a lot of things. And they all were sedentary, more or less, and cerebral. And climbing is that way. It is very physical also, like that, Half Dome. We went from 5:30 to 11 at night, nonstop. Go, go, go. And so, you have to be able to do that. So we did this climb. I think you can see it. This climb right behind me.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
That's called Royal Arches. And because they're Royal Arches. And
yeah.
There's a lot of arches carved carved into the wall by nature. And so they call it Royal Arches. And Royal Arches is a big climb. It's 15 pitches. It's way higher than anything I had even attempted. And Royal Arches is on the same side of the Yosemite Valley as Half Dome. It's basically the same wall, but like 2.5 miles down or 3 miles down. And it faces Half Dome. You can see Half Dome all the way down, all the way up. So Alex agreed to take me up this Royal Arches, and we did it in fairly good time. I mean, we didn't leave the ground until like 9 a.m, and we were down for supper. Decent time. So, and when I have to preface that, of course, but my son holds the speed records on everything in the world, and so when you go with Alex, you go really fast. Really fast. I didn't realize this. I didn't realize this until like after we did El Capitan. So all the way. This is one climb. Sometimes when you climb up a wall like these things, you can walk off the back. You can walk off hike down a gully or something. Sometimes you have to go down the ropes that you came up on, the same way you came up. This was one of those. So all the way down, we were rappelling down the front on the ropes, Alex and I, 15 pitches. I had a lot of time to think. And all the way down, I was thinking, I just did Royal Arches, a big wall, what climbers call a big wall. I wonder if someday I might be able to do that other big wall just down the road a piece, just 2 miles that way. And so that thought started to nibble away at my brain, and it started to intrude itself into my teaching and my everything. When I'm standing and cooking dinner, I'm thinking, so I started researching it, online, because I always did my homework first to find out everything I could about the climbs I was going to do, because I'm not that good. Alex can walk up to a wall and say, I think I'll go this way, and just do it. I'm not there. I never will be. So I do all my research on my computer. I look at what people have said about it, what the difficulty level, what gear you'll need, how long it'll take, all that stuff that I need to know. Where I might be able to, zip out and go to the bathroom in the woods, things like this. The down to earth stuff that you need to know. Can I carry enough food for a climb like this? Things like this. So I started to research. So one day he came home. He was restocking his van from my refrigerator, and he walked to, and I was sitting in the dining room with my computer looking at El Cap. So I stopped him. I said, Alex, do you think maybe someday? I didn't really expect a yes from him, because he knows me. He knows how I climb, and he knows how slow I am and how methodical. So do you think maybe someday you might lead me up El Cap? And I stopped breathing for a moment, wondering what he was going to say. And he said, didn't bat an eye. He said, yeah, sure. But you have to learn how to jug. Okay. I had no idea what that meant, but I had a yeah, sure. So, okay. And then he left. He left for another 6 months or whatever it was, Borneo or Siberia or wherever he was that year. And so I immediately contacted all my climbing friends. What is jugging? What does that mean? What need how to, and I found out what I needed to know. I found out what I needed to have, what gear I would need. I found out what I need to learn how to do, and who knew how to do it, and where I could do it. And I started working. I started practicing. I got some jugs, so that climbers call them jugs, or they're called jumars. A jumar is a big metal handle that clips onto the rope, and it also attaches to your harness and to your foot. And you have one for each hand. And you sort of ladder your way up the rope. You raise your right side, your hand and your foot. And then you stand up on that one, and you raise your left side to join it, because you're on one rope. So they're above you, one above the other. You go up, and then you join it. And you go up again, you join it. And you ladder your way up the rope. It's an enormous amount of work, enormous amount of physical work. Boy, was that hard. When I started, I was a wreck. The first time I ever did it was in a gym. Locally here, I got somebody to show me how to attach all this stuff. There's so much to know. Yeah. I had no clue. It was so intricate and so much jargon to know. You have to know what everything's called, and you have to know how to attach it and how not to attach it, and what to put on top of the, if you put this on top and this below, that doesn't work because this has to move first, all this stuff. And so I figured it all out, how to attach. I went to a gym with a friend, and there's only one climbing gym that would have let me do that indoors, because it's probably an insurance issue. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of danger involved. Yeah, you don't know what you're doing. Yeah.
Well, Dierdre, we are at that point where I know you have places to go. We are not done with this conversation. Clearly, I have more questions, and I really want to hear the end of this cliffhanger story, this jugging. It is a cliffhanger, literally, no pun intended. So before I let you go, and, we'll let everybody wait for our second time, what are a couple of thoughts that you would like to tell people about this mindset thing about your age and what you're capable of?
Oh, so much. Don't believe what you hear in the media. For one thing, the most overarching piece of advice is turn off your screens. Don't let them tell you what you should look like. Don't let them tell you what you should be wearing. Don't let them tell you what drugs you should be taking for this or that. listen to your body. Listen to your own body. You and your body know what you need. A very simple way to get in tune with all that is journaling. Talk to yourself on paper or on your keyboard, whatever you choose to use. Paper is better because it's slower and it slows down your thought processes, makes you really think things through. Pen or and if you can, do it in a different language. So you don't have to worry about anybody finding your journals and reading it. That's what I used to do. Because my mother was the prying type, and I did so I did it in a different language. But if you can't do that, make it safe somewhere and just pour your heart out. Not your heart, but your mind. You need to get in touch with your body, with your mind, with what you love, with what you want, and what you're afraid of. And you have to figure out why you're afraid of it. And you can do all of that so easily in a journal. And it is easy. Once you get started, people say, I don't know how to start. Sit there, turn on a timer, pick up the pen, put it down on your paper, and don't stop. The timer goes off. It's very simple. And you'll be amazed at where your hand will take you, where your pen will take you. You'll be amazed at what you can figure out that way. But turn off the darn screens. That's what does it to us. We love consuming that colorful stuff on the screens, and it's so bad for us. And none of us in my family had that. I mean, I had a little TV when I was growing up, but once I became an adult and realized all this, we didn't have it in our house, and it made such a difference. And both of my adult children, people say, well, yeah, that wouldn't work with my family, but both of my children, after they became adults, clear thinking adults, both of them have thanked me for that. They realized the effect it had on all of us. So that's my first big takeaway.
Amazing. Well, I know you need to go, but I'm dying to finish this conversation. So I will let my listeners know that you can hear this first part if you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 279. Deirdre and I will get together and finish this. Deirdre, I want to thank you so much.
You tell them they can read the book maybe before they hear the second episode. That would help.
The Sharp End of Life. You can get it on Audible. You can also get a paper copy in your hand.
Anywhere you can buy books.
Amazing. Deirdre, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
It was such a joy. Friends, go listen to this book or read it. We will be getting together and finishing this conversation. Remember, as Deirdre says, it's all in your mind. You can do anything you set your mind to, right?
Absolutely.
There's no reason you can't. The only reason you can't is because you think you can't.
Right.
So get out there, try something new, stretch yourself, and see what you're capable of. Thanks so much for being with us today, my friends. Bye-bye.